Welcome to the High Bar, your weekly watering hole for lighthearted conversation with people who care about culture that matters. I'm Warren Etheridge, your host and barkeep, and I promise never to cut anyone off while encouraging us all to think responsibly. Today, along with my guest Jen Worick, author and blogger, we will raise a toast and raise the bar for the functional family. If you're anything like me, you know that family is a treacherous situation. You can't live with them and you can't move far enough away. But today we have somebody who's going to put the functional back into family, the author of more books than Scott Turow and far sweeter, funnier, and more beautiful, the fabulous Jen Worick. Thanks for coming.
Oh, glad to be here.
We're going to raise a toast to the functional family today. Is that
Awesome.
correct?
Yes, that's appropriate with my family. Anyway.
Now, many people have problems with their family. I mean, to say dysfunctional family at this point seems redundant for most individuals. They're all messed up in some manner.
Functional families seem actually pretty abnormal to me.
Right, and the few times I've met people with seemingly normal families, I get freaked out. I get a little uneasy.
Are you a pod person?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like to think that they're really unhappy deep down.
Clearly, they're crying inside.
But you have a new book, Beyond the Family Tree, in which you actually want to help people not only maintain a relationship, but improve their relationships with their kin.
Yes.
How can that possibly be done?
Well, you know, it kind of started out of me working on another book project where I needed to figure out how to milk a cow. So I emailed my dad and asked if our relatives in northern Michigan had a dairy farm, and he replied, I grew up on a farm with cows, and that farm, my grandparents' house, was right next to the house I grew up in, but I was so focused on getting out of southwestern Michigan that I didn't really pay attention to my own family history, and it was kind of shameful to me to recognize that. And, you know, when, grandparents pass away, you often hear things during the eulogy or, with relatives talking that you never knew about your grandparents. And it's really sad that these stories are often just lost to time when you don't take the time to actually get to know them, let alone your siblings and stuff. I pretty much moved as far away in the continental U.S. as I could from my family. And, I'm starting to realize that instead of always saying that I'm the white sheep of the family and seeing that I'm different, I'm trying to figure out how I am the same and how I can connect with them. And it does seem to be a pretty common, I don't know if it's generational or, people are becoming more and more educated, and maybe previous generations just have different interests and education levels, so you feel disconnected from them somehow. But, I was talking to a very high-profile attorney who told me a similar story about how she had gone to a family wedding and pretended not to know her uncle because he was there in overalls. And, the fact that she gave that up to me was pretty incredible. But, that's an extreme example. But I think there are many cases where you just feel like you don't have anything in common with your relatives. They might be far flung or they might be just down the street, but you just feel like you have to find your own tribe of friends. And I think there are ways to actually bridge the gap and feel like you are part of a family instead of feeling like you're always so different.
Right. So, I guess part of that is the idea that we can go off and find our friends. That whole thing, you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family. But is that a good thing? I mean, do we really want to get to know our family? I'm not positive on this one. I hate to be skeptical.
There are the requisite, family trips every now and again, or there's holiday gatherings, and I think that you can kind of replay the same bad dynamic, and you start to think that this is just the way it is. Uncle Ted's going to get drunk at Thanksgiving and throw something at the TV during the football game, or somebody else is going to say really inappropriate comments, or somebody brings all their kids and they're out of control and you're not really excited about that. And I think my whole thing.
Why do I want to know that better? Sound like people I want to know?
Because I do think, for instance, I just went last month to my niece's wedding in Georgia. My brother's daughter got married. And again, we're all very different, but, I kind of went armed with some questions and things that I wanted to ask.
Okay. I like that you're taking a very aggressive approach to this. You're
It was
armed with
necessary.
questions.
He was in the Army for 20 years, so, it was kind of appropriate because I was asking to see his man cave, and he had all these, boards on the wall, which I asked him about, and he's like, oh, I've taken those off. They're battle boards. I've taken them off each tank I commanded, and I never knew that about him. And while I'm not necessarily, down with, aggressive military action and stuff, I really respect that he did that, and that's important to him. And, then I started finding he's a miner. Well, not a miner. He doesn't have a long beard or anything. He lives in Georgia, and he goes and looks for old gold mining equipment and stuff. So that's kind of his thing that he collects. I mean, I grew up in this family of collectors, you wouldn't believe. Everybody had their thing. And my thing now, I'm realizing, is beach glass. I'll go to Golden Gardens or Discovery Park, and I can spend hours just looking for glass amongst the pebbles and the rocks. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the family gene, that I have. It's just manifested itself in this different way. So anyway, as far as going, to holiday events, I think there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of take matters in hand and kind of control the conversation a little more rather than just accept that it's going to be the same dynamic and that you're going to be listening to your monologue in your head instead of your stepdad tell the same story every year.
Right. So people do tell the same stories all the time, and my mother, bless her heart, can't talk about anything really other than the weather with me. I know the weather in New Jersey anytime. And that's I call, there's the weather. Got it? And then I have to tell her how the Seattle weather is.
If only we knew.
If only. But we can expand on that, and I'm going to benefit from it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole, the beauty of this book is it tells you how to kind of interview your family and get the right equipment, for interviewing, which you would already know, and then how to use social media to stay connected. But the bulk of the book is 1,000 questions divided by topic. You could really go into the weather thing and ask her if she's experienced any extreme weather, like tornadoes.
Oh, she tells me.
Or anything like that. Or when she was a kid, or if she's always had this fascination with weather. Or, ask her if she watches weather in other areas.
Why do I want to do that? That's what it's like. This is what I'm trying to understand. And maybe it's because I come from a miserable family. But I don't understand why, because I know that deep down my mother and I disagree on politics and a number of things. And at least the weather is innocuous. But if I dig deeper, I may find some truly loathsome aspects of her. And right now I'm in a happy place.
Don't they say knowledge is power in Schoolhouse Rock?
Yeah, but what, the power to do what? I was adopted. I mean, I already spend my life doing that.
What is it about her that she's obsessed with the weather?
I think that's an easy way to have conversation for her because it's non-confrontational. Really, when we get into other conversations, it can become a little bit ugly because we disagree on so much.
So it's a neutral topic?
Right. My mother likes to live in a state of oblivion. I really hope she turns into this episode, because that'll be delightful.
That'd be awesome. Most of my family's in Michigan, so I can probably say, I can probably talk about the drinking problems and things.
The last time I did a TV series, I sent them to my mom, and I was waiting months for a response from her, and what she called me and said, why would anybody want to watch that? That was her little gung-ho pep talk for me.
That's nice. You come from a really supportive family.
Yeah, it's really touching.
Well, my thing is that I'm in my early 40s and I'm single and I'm starting to think who's going to take care of me when I'm old, you know?
But in our culture, we don't do that. See, this is the thing, is that you can talk to your family more, but in different cultures, like the Asian cultures, they take care of their elders.
Right.
Italian men live with their mothers until they can't possibly anymore. In other cultures it works, but here you could get to know your family better. They're still not going to take care of you. You're just going to be crazy Aunt Jen collecting beach glass.
I already am. It's sad, yeah. Yeah, I'm the wacky one who's and at this, believe me, it's like a constant practice. At this wedding, my dad started making like the single jokes. Oh, your niece got married before you did. It's like, in what universe do you think that's funny? Like they all just think I've chosen to be this career gal. And I mean, I don't know what they imagine my like dance card is like, but I think they probably think I'm like Carrie Bradshaw or something,
The lucrative world of publishing, come on.
Rather than like Gollum like hunched over a computer like writing text every night in my apartment. So that kind of stuff still happens where they're saying like really aggravating things. And that's why I always try and come up with like an alternate thing to diffuse it. Like talking about people's childhood, I think is usually kind of a safe topic and somewhat interesting because you start to learn about your own family tree and your genealogy. And again, you're like not.
No, I do hear you, and I know how to interview people, and I think that's interesting. But what am I getting to? Like, tell me a success story. Tell me something. I mean, battle boards. That's somebody like destroying government property, and he should be turned in right now. But tell me a story where like you learned something about a relative or something, and you went, oh my goodness. We're actually, we're kindred spirits. I had no idea. She seemed like a yutz on the surface, but now I realize that is me 20 years from now. Something like that.
Oh, gosh. It's almost like now you're kind of like debunking my whole book because now I'm thinking like all the ways I'm like my mother that scare me, But, I do think the thing with my brother was interesting because I knew he did like the mining stuff and that he's the family genealogist. Like he's turning into my dad, basically. He was a train collector and kind of ruined all of our childhood by like taking us on the family road trip every summer for 2 weeks, which sounds like a good idea, but it was always on the old highway next to the train tracks so we could spot any sort of chassis system or B&O engine coming down the pike.
There's a 411, right, or something like that, and you get to check out the locomotive. And
yeah, I mean, and I thought maybe I've made this out to be bigger in my mind than it really is, but he came out to visit a couple years ago with my stepmom, and on the way back from Vancouver on I-5, there was a train coming. So he sped up, got 2 exits ahead of this train, pulled off right by the tracks, pulled out his camera, which is always behind his seat, the same like Nikon beat up camera he's had all his life, and got out, snapped the photos, and got back in the car. I mean, this is what he did like the entire, I mean, every day we were in a car driving with like the cooler in the back with like cold cuts for our lunch and stuff. Occasionally, if we were lucky, we got to go to Denny's, and we each had a $5 limit, and he kind of taught us math that way because we had to figure out how we could get like the Grand Slam with a juice and maybe a side of toast or something for $4.99. But finding out things about my family, that's a good question. I am circling back to your question.
Has it made your family life better?
Most definitely.
Okay.
I go home usually at the holidays, and my mom and stepdad, they pretty much go to the American Legion every night and drink and tell the same stories. And so I kind of decided a couple years ago, they have this Christmas Eve open house, and all their friends, they bring their own coolers of beer and like plant themselves in there and just get, piss drunk, And so, a couple years ago, I took a video camera home and I just started asking them about, tell me your engagement story, whether I really wanted to hear that or not. And got both of them telling the story on camera. And I was able to see my stepdad as more of this like colorful character than as kind of a redneck, which is what I had always kind of viewed him as,
So now he's a colorful redneck.
Right. Which, at least there's material there,
Right.
But I don't necessarily have that like, every time I have that monologue in my head, I'm not being really present or trying to connect at all. I'm trying to think how I'm different and frankly superior than everybody else, which is not a nice quality to have.
No.
I mean,
but very American.
In thinking about movies like this, I was thinking about the fact that I really have a hard time watching Sweet Home Alabama with Reese Witherspoon, because she is like not a likable person, and I could totally relate to her kind of being embarrassed by her family, but ultimately like realizing how she was like them and defending them and the way they were at the end. But, she's not real likable through the whole thing. She's a pill to her friends, she's a pill to her family. But, she kind of embraces her roots at the end.
So you learned from the movie Sweet Home Alabama.
I did. I did.
Something I never thought would
Maybe
come out of
that's my
somebody's
next.
mouth.
Maybe that's my next book. Everything I need to know, I learned from Reese Witherspoon. You know.